It was meant to be an ordinary summer night, 4 teenagers, a tent, and the calm serenity of Finland's Lake Bodom. The year was 1960, and the group had chosen a quiet spot near the water, hoping to enjoy nature, friendship, and a bit of adventure. But by dawn, that peaceful night would descend into horror. 3 of the teens were found brutally murdered inside and around their tent. The only survivor, 18-year-old Niels Gustafsson, was discovered beaten, bloodied, and barely conscious. His jaw shattered, his memory fractured. There were no signs of forced entry, no clear motive, and no definitive suspect. Over 60 years later, the mystery of what really happened that night remains unsolved, fueling rumors, conspiracies, and a chilling question that lingers to this day. Who or what was lurking outside that tent, waiting in the dark? In the early days of June 1960, as school term neared its end and summer began to stretch across Finland, 4 teenagers made plans for a quiet weekend getaway. Their idea was simple: escape the routine of daily life and spend a night camping by the water. The group consisted of Niels Wilhelm Gustafsson, 18, and his close friend Seppo Boisman, also 18, along with their girlfriends, Maila Irmeli Björklund and Anja Maki, both just 15 years old. Niels and Maila were in a romantic relationship, while Seppo and Anja were close, possibly dating, though nothing was ever formally confirmed. What was clear, however, was the bond between the 4. They were young, energetic, and looking forward to a peaceful night under the stars. Their destination was Lake Bodom, a scenic body of water near the city of Espoo, just west of Helsinki. The southern shore of the lake, in particular, was a popular camping spot, far enough from the town to feel isolated, yet close enough to be accessible by motorbike. On the morning of Saturday, June 4th, 1960, the group packed their things and headed out on 2 light motorcycles, models of the popular German-made Zundap brand. They brought along a small 4-person tent, sleeping bags, some food and drinks, and a few personal belongings. It wasn't a trip that required much planning, just a single night, 1 peaceful campsite, and 4 friends hoping to enjoy the fresh air and freedom. They arrived at the lake later that afternoon and set up their tent near the southeastern shore, close enough to the water to enjoy the view, but partially hidden by trees. Other campers and fishermen were reported to have been in the area, but none were nearby. The group wasn't completely alone, but they were certainly isolated enough to feel they had their own space. As evening fell, the 4 were seen by distant witnesses, chatting and relaxing outside their tent. There were no signs of trouble, no arguments, no unusual behavior, just 4 teenagers enjoying a summer evening. But somewhere beyond the trees, someone, or something, was watching. What none of them could have known was that before dawn, a brutal and senseless massacre would unfold at their quiet lakeside camp, leaving only one of them alive, and a mystery that would haunt Finland for generations. At dawn on Sunday, June 5th, 1960, concern began to grow among the families and friends of the 4 teenagers who hadn't returned as expected. With no cell, phones, or quick means of communication, there was no way for the teens to alert anyone if something went wrong. After hours of waiting with no sign of them, relatives decided to start searching. Around 8 a.m., a local fisherman wandering near Lake Bodom noticed the campsite. Approaching cautiously, he found the tent in a disturbing state, torn from one side, with dark stains that turned out to be blood scattered on the ground nearby. The peaceful camping scene they had anticipated was nowhere to be found. The fisherman immediately alerted the police, who arrived quickly with a team of investigators. Upon arrival, the officers encountered a horrifying scene. 3 bodies lay strewn around the tent, partially covered with fabric or clothing, some unclothed in parts, signaling the extreme violence inflicted upon them. The tent itself was ripped open on one side, and there were visible scratch marks and disturbed soil around the site. Scattered camping gear, leftover food, and personal items lay abandoned, as if the attack had been sudden and brutal. The victims were identified as Mela Irmeli Björklund, Anja Tuulikki-Mäki, and Seppo Boisman. The fourth friend, Niels Wilhelm Gustafsson, was found inside the tent, lying on the ground, severely injured and barely conscious. He was bleeding profusely from wounds to his head and jaw. Niels showed deep cuts and bruises, indicating a desperate attempt to defend himself or fight off the attacker. When questioned, his speech was slurred and faint, due to the injuries that made it difficult for him to talk clearly. Investigators noted a chilling mystery at the scene. No clear signs of forced entry or struggle outside the tent, and no distinct footprints indicating a known intruder's approach or escape. The violence had struck quickly and ferociously, leaving no time for the victims to call for help or escape. Forensic teams collected blood samples and took fingerprints, but tangible clues were scarce. No murder weapon was found at the scene, and none of the victims' belongings appeared to be missing, ruling out robbery as a motive. Amidst the shock and confusion, Niels was rushed to a hospital in Helsinki, where he underwent intensive treatment and remained under medical supervision for months. Meanwhile, the police launched one of Finland's most complex and haunting investigations, trying to unravel the mystery behind the brutal attack at Lake Bodom, a case that would grip the nation's imagination for decades to come. After Niels Gustafsson was rushed to the hospital in critical condition, he remained unconscious or unable to communicate clearly for quite some time due to severe head and facial injuries. As his condition gradually improved, the police began receiving fragments of information from him about that terrifying night. Niels struggled with memory recall, often repeating parts of his story inconsistently, which made it difficult for investigators to piece together an accurate account. He described how he and his friends were enjoying their camping night when suddenly they were attacked by an unknown assailant, throwing the scene into chaos and panic. He said the attack happened very quickly, and although he tried to defend himself, he could not see the attacker's features clearly due to the darkness and the confusion. Niels also mentioned hearing strange noises and movements just moments before the assault. Certain parts of his testimony raised many questions, such as his inability to describe the attacker or understand the motive behind the sudden attack. Minor contradictions in his account were likely caused by psychological trauma and physical injuries. Niels's testimony became the starting point for the police investigation, but it was far from enough to close the case or point to a specific suspect. This left the Lake Bodom mystery shrouded in unanswered questions and growing fears. After the brutal murders at Lake Bodom, Finnish authorities launched a large-scale investigation. However, the scene had already been compromised. Local villagers, police, journalists, and curious onlookers had unknowingly trampled crucial evidence. This contamination made it extremely difficult to conduct a proper forensic examination and played a major role in the case remaining unsolved for decades. Hans Assmann. One of the most discussed suspects in the Lake Bodom case was Hans Assmann, a German man living in Finland who allegedly had connections to both Soviet and German intelligence. He came under suspicion after arriving at a Helsinki hospital the morning after the murders, with his clothes stained with what appeared to be blood. According to nurses, he was nervous, evasive, and attempted to fake unconsciousness. Despite the suspicious circumstances, the hospital staff didn't notify police immediately. When authorities were finally alerted, they couldn't connect him directly to the crime. His clothes were never analyzed properly, and he had what was described as an alibi, though the details remain unclear. Over the years, several people claimed that Hans confessed indirectly or hinted at involvement in the murders, but nothing could be proven. Niels Gustafsson. The sole survivor, Niels Gustafsson, was initially treated as a victim. However, in 2004, 44 years after the murders, he was arrested and charged with the deaths of his three friends. The new theory presented by prosecutors claimed that Niels had argued with his friend Seppo that night, possibly over romantic jealousy involving his girlfriend, Mila. According to this theory, the fight turned violent, and Niels, in a fit of rage, murdered the others and inflicted injuries on himself to appear as a victim. Forensic reanalysis of blood patterns and other physical evidence was used to support this claim. However, the case against Niels was largely circumstantial, and in 2005, he was acquitted due to insufficient evidence. He was officially declared innocent. The strange man, or man with glowing eyes. Several witnesses reported seeing a strange man wandering around the area near Lake Bodom in the days before the murders. Described as tall, thin, and having an unsettling presence, he reportedly kept his distance but was seen observing campers from afar. After the murders, he disappeared without a trace. The police were never able to identify or locate him, and he remains a mysterious figure tied to various conspiracy theories around the case. Police mistakes and forensic failures. Criticism was heavily directed at the initial handling of the case. No proper perimeter was secured at the scene. Items were moved, evidence was not catalogued carefully, and early interrogations were rushed. Forensics in 1960s Finland were not yet advanced, and much of the evidence collected couldn't be used effectively. Later efforts to use DNA analysis and modern forensic methods were hampered by the poor preservation of the original evidence. Even though the case was re-examined multiple times, including with the involvement of international experts, no concrete answers emerged. Despite decades of theories, false leads, and trials, the question remains: who really killed the teenagers at Lake Bodom? Was it a jealous friend, a random madman, or someone whose identity we may never know? Over the decades, several theories have emerged, some plausible, others speculative, each attempting to explain who could have committed the murders and why. None have been definitively proven, and the mystery remains one of Finland's most unsettling cold cases. 2. The random killer theory. Many believe the murders were the work of a random, deranged individual, someone passing through the area with no connection to the victims. The brutality of the attack, combined with the fact that valuables were left untouched, supports the idea that robbery was not the motive. Some locals reported seeing a strange man lurking around the campsite days before the incident. His identity was never confirmed, and he was never found. This unknown man has since become an ominous figure in Finnish folklore, symbolizing the faceless killer who vanishes without a trace. A personal vendetta. Another theory suggests the murders were committed by someone who knew the victims and had a personal motive, possibly jealousy, betrayal, or revenge. This theory gained traction after the later suspicion cast on Niels Gustafsson, the sole survivor. However, aside from Niels, no other individual was ever identified who had a direct conflict with the group, making this theory difficult to verify. The intelligence conspiracy theory. Because Hans Assmann was suspected of having ties to Soviet intelligence, a few theorists have speculated that the murders might be linked to espionage. This would mean the teenagers either witnessed something they weren't supposed to, or were killed to send a message. While this makes for a compelling narrative, it lacks solid evidence and is considered far-fetched by most serious investigators. The serial killer hypothesis. Some have tried to link the Lake Bodom murders to other unsolved killings across Finland and Scandinavia in the same era. Similarities in the method, attacking campers at night, extreme violence, and use of a knife or blunt object suggest to some a serial offender, but again, no conclusive forensic links were found. Mistaken identity. This theory posits that the teens were not the intended victims, that someone else was supposed to be at the campsite that night, and the killer struck the wrong group. This, however, relies on a chain of assumptions, and there's no direct evidence to suggest such a mix-up occurred. From reviewing the facts, it's clear that critical mistakes were made early in the investigation, mistakes that likely allowed the real killer to slip away unnoticed. The lack of proper scene control, the failure to collect and preserve evidence, and the conflicting witness testimonies created a cloud of confusion that still lingers. Personally, the crime feels too violent and targeted to be random. The killer knew what he was doing and left minimal traces. Whether it was a jealous friend, a passing madman, or someone connected to something deeper, remains the haunting question. Even after all these years, the Lake Bodom story still touches us deeply. Imagine being young, full of dreams, planning a simple camping trip, and then, in what was supposed to be one of the best memories of their lives, it turned into a tragic nightmare. To me, what happened there isn't just a random accident or bad luck. It's a story about pain, betrayal, and maybe a wrong that's never been fully uncovered. As humans, we always seek answers to understand and come to terms with the past, but sometimes those answers remain just out of reach. No matter what the truth is, we have to remember them as people, not just victims. Young souls with hopes and dreams, and by sharing their story, we keep their memory alive. I hope their story reminds us to always be careful, to cherish every moment, and to try to be closer to one another. Because in the end, life can change in an instant, and memory is the only thing that truly lasts.